Hello and welcome to Past, Present, Future Cast, the podcast that's also a tarot reading. I'm your host, Maria Elena Pakoulis, and for our card of the week this week, it's kind of a special week because we have a new moon. So we're looking at the week of February 23rd to March 1st. And we have the Pisces new moon on February 27th. The card that I pulled for this week is the same card that I pulled last week. And I'm using a different deck this week. So at some point I would love to do a deck review of all the tarot decks that I have and work with. I'm going to do a little mini version right now and tell you a bit about the deck that I'm using this week. So this is the same deck that I used in the interview that you'll hear in the rest of this episode. And it's called the Fifth Spirit Tarot by Charlie Claire Burgess. If you're watching the video, here's what the box looks like. This is what my box looks like. I was a supporter for the original Kickstarter. This was a indie deck initially backed by Kickstarter. I believe this first edition came out, I want to say 2020, 2021. I know it was a pandemic project. And the tagline for this deck is a queer and inclusive deck for a world beyond binaries. So I wanted to use the Fifth Spirit Tarot this week, especially when interviewing my guest Carly, who you'll hear from in a little bit, because Carly is the founder of a queer social group here in Tucson, Arizona. So we're working with my favorite queer-inspired deck. The artist behind the deck, Charlie Claire Burgess, is a queer, non-binary, trans creator, and I absolutely adore their work. I recently got their book Radical Tarot, and I'm making my way through it. So they're an amazing author and deck creator. This is the first deck that they created, Fifth Spirit Tarot, and they now have a new deck out called the Gay Marseille, and I highly recommend their work. So the card that we've pulled for this week, February 23rd to March 1st, is the same card that we pulled last week. It's the Five of Cups yet again. I can note that this week it did come out reversed, and for a card that has a little bit more of a negative connotation, I do somewhat like to see them reversed more than upright, because it's giving a sense that there's a little bit of change here, that maybe we're learning a little bit of this lesson, that maybe this is the week where some of that water, some of those waters get moved and pushed through us. Because with the Five of Cups, again, we're talking about turbulent waters. We're talking about changes when it comes to our internal landscape. This version of the Five of Cups gives us a little bit of a different image than the deck we took a look at last week. So here we have a home. We see a home kind of central to the card, and it's surrounded by floodwaters, these dark, murky floodwaters. And we see a little boat making its way, floating along. It is managing these currents pretty well. Above the house, we have 5 different vessels that could hold liquid, I guess we can say. One of them is a soda can that's empty and has been crushed. One is the top of what appears to be a glass bottle that has been broken off. The bottom's been broken off. We just see the top, so this can no longer hold liquid. We see a mug that's turned upright, and the last kind of drops of what was within it are dripping out. And then we have 2 cups that are still upright. So we have a little mug of tea. It's got a little tea bag with a little tag from a tea bag sticking out from it, and that is still holding liquid. And then we have a beautiful glass of clear water. And then there's some botanicals framing those floodwaters, and I'm gonna confirm in my guidebook here. I'm pretty sure this is meant to be St. John's wort. Let's see if I'm correct. Oh, it's mullein. I was incorrect. This is mullein. Charlie Claire Burgess writes here, the water is framed by mullein, a hedge plant whose magical properties include protection and courage, and which has connections with mourning through its use in ancient Roman funerary rites. The last line here says, 3 of the 5 cups are empty, but 2 are intact and full, a reminder that not all is lost. Though the house is flooded, in the attic a light still burns. A light still burns. Not all is lost. So we're still holding on to that sense that not all is lost. Maybe this is the week now where some of those emotions start to move a little bit more, start to be stirred a little bit more. That water we can let flush out. Please stay so hydrated this week, especially with this Pisces new moon. We always want to stay hydrated. That's just basic body maintenance. But with all this kind of energetic stuff, gunk going on in the watery realms, we want to make sure that we're flushing everything out. In my day job as a massage therapist, I'm always giving people the advice of please drink lots of water after your massage, because as we've worked those tissues, worked the muscles, we're clearing out any like waste matter that's in our tissues. We're moving that out, and we want to use the water to be able to fully flush that out of ourselves. Thinking again about that 5 of Cups, we're letting things move. Let your emotions flow. Let the tears come. Let the laughs come. Let the laughs come so hard that the tears come. Since we have the same card this week as we have last week, it's still the same advice. That's get in water, stay really hydrated, be with your emotions, be with your feelings. One of the sentences that stuck out to me when I was just briefly glancing into the guidebook for the Fifth Spirit Tarot was Burgess writing about how this card often comes up when they haven't fully or properly mourned something. If there's something that you are still grieving, that you are still mourning, that you haven't let yourself feel the full and complete emotional impact of that, try your best to really sit with it. Allow yourself a quiet moment. Unplug. Turn off that external influence. You can just sit with your own thoughts. It's really uncomfortable sometimes, but it eventually leads to the flushing out of whatever it is that's stuck there and needs your attention. I want to talk a little bit about the tarot connection to the sign of Pisces. All of the major arcana cards in a tarot deck, and if you don't necessarily know what I mean by major arcana, I actually explain it a little bit in the interview that you're going to listen to, but I'll give it to you again now. A tarot deck is divided into 2 unequal halves. We have the major arcana and the minor arcana. The 5 of Cups, as we were just discussing, is one of the minor arcana cards. That's the part of a tarot deck that's arranged or organized more similarly to a standard deck of playing cards. We have the Ace of whatever suit. There's 4 suits. There's the Ace of Cups, the 2 of Wands, the 5 of Cups, the 6 of Swords, the 10 of Wands, and then the court cards also go in there. The pages, the queens, the knights, the kings. They're in the minor arcana. And then we have the major arcana, which is 22 cards out of the 78 card deck. So the 22 cards numbered 0 through 21. And each of these cards can be associated with a sign or planet in the zodiac. Astrology and tarot developed completely separately, and there is not any formal overlap necessarily, but because both of these systems work and both of these systems are pulling on similar archetypes, there is now a system where we can overlap the 12 signs and the 7 traditional planets and assign each of those to a major arcana card. So this week on Thursday, the 27th of February, there is a Pisces new moon. So the moon and the sun are going to be coming together, forming a conjunction in the sign of Pisces. And Pisces in tarot is associated with the moon card. That's funny, right? You would think that the moon would be associated with the moon card, but actually the moon is associated with a different card. And Pisces is associated with the moon. And that tracks more with the interpretation of what the moon card represents. I want to read another quote. I love reading to you guys. I just think that books are such a great way to study these esoteric sciences, and so I like bringing you little snippets from my library. So this book is called Mythic Astrology by Liz Green, who is a fantastic astrologer and also a tarot scholar. So Liz Green has written tons and tons of books about tarot and also about astrology, and this is a really fun little overlap. So talking about Pisces, Liz Green writes, "The underwater landscape of Pisces is the magical kingdom at the bottom of the sea, where shapes both monstrous and beautiful swim through the waters, and the secret of immortality is hidden in the depths. So there's a lot there about the monsters at the bottom of the ocean. And that's what the moon card is about. So in this version of the moon, drawn by Charlie Claire Burgess, we see this cloaked figure walking through kind of a swampy landscape. I imagine these are mangrove trees. They're growing in water. This person is wading through shallow waters, and there's a big full moon in the sky above them. And we see all these little kind of glowing lights around. It's giving very will-o'-the-wisp. The moon card speaks to experiences or instances in our life or ways of being where we are exploring those internal depths. We're going really deep inward into maybe our subconscious, our unconscious, and we're seeing what monsters and beasts and hidden figures reside there. Liz Green used the word savage, and I think she's using that word to connect to the instinctual aspect of these hidden beasts and monsters. And when I'm saying beasts and monsters, these are parts of ourselves, parts of our psyche. We can think of the metaphor of deep sea creatures, but those deep sea creatures, they're part of the animal kingdom. They're part of our world. They're part of this like collective earth sphere experience. So if we're thinking of ourselves as this like microcosm of that, as above, so below, the monsters that we're encountering are aspects of ourselves hidden deep in those shadows that sometimes can only be illuminated by the light of the moon. The sunlight is too harsh, it's too bright. That's for these daytime creative endeavors. But when we're really getting to the depths of the psyche, that's where we need to go into the darkness and into the shadows. And there's so much talk in spiritual spaces of light equals good, dark equals bad. And that's bullshit, right? That's just total, complete bullshit. Neutral. It's all freaking neutral. It's neither good nor bad. It's both and. It's good and bad. It's everything. Everything is everything. I should put that on a hat. Embroider that on a hat. Everything is everything. These creatures, I'm giving them kind of intense names, these beasts, these monsters, these savage monsters within us, but it's really all neutral. It's just parts of ourselves that maybe societal conditioning or experiences that we've had have taught us that they're scary or that they're bad or that there is some kind of like badness there. But really, it's just parts. Like especially when we're talking about instinct, so much of the world around us trains us out of acting on instinct. And in some instances, that's all good and fine. There's some instincts that we don't need to jump to immediately all of the time. But there's also parts of ourselves deep within that it could serve us to embrace a little bit more. So thinking about that this week as we have this Pisces new moon, that aspect of ourselves, that Piscean part of ourselves, we all have Pisces in our chart, right? If you're not as familiar with astrology, maybe you've looked up just a list of your placements and you go, I don't have anything in Pisces. I don't have any planets in Pisces. So I don't have any Pisces in my chart. We all have Pisces in our chart. It's going to be a section there that is ruling over some aspect of our lives, or some aspect of our lives is heavily connected to the Piscean nature. So we all have Pisces qualities. That part of ourselves, that part of our life, there's some new beginnings happening with that this week because of that Pisces new moon. So there's some new beginnings if we're thinking about the moon card in tarot, some new beginnings around maybe how we're embracing some aspects of ourselves that we've maybe not explored before. We're a little scared to explore. I know growing up I had, and still sometimes now, I've mostly grown out of this, but growing up I was always afraid of the dark. And a lot of that fear of the dark was because I couldn't see everything around me, and I was afraid that some monster or some beast, not even an animal. I wasn't necessarily even afraid of just regular old animals. I think I was afraid of some like mythic beast climbing out of the darkness and coming to get me. And how can we get more comfortable in that darkness, in that forest with our unconscious. There's some newness, some new beginnings, maybe encouraging us to explore that a little bit more. And so much of this is connected to our spirituality, because Pisces is a sign that's so connected. It's the final sign in the zodiac. If Aries, the first sign in the zodiac, is if Aries we can think of as being the baby of the zodiac, Pisces is this like final sign in the zodiac, and it also connects into that part of the life where our spirit goes back to the collective, goes back to the soup, is what I call it. So when we die, I can just say it plainly, when we die. And in my cosmology, in my way of thinking about the world, I think of that time when our spirit separates from our body as us going back into kind of like the collective, us rejoining the whole that our spirit is a part of or is separated from when we are embodied, when we enter into a body. We're going back into the soup, is what I like to say, is what I call it, the collective soup. And the moon is really about understanding, witnessing, maybe trying to navigate that soup. There's always going to be a disconnect. While we're here on Earth, we're in a body. We're meant to be doing earthly things, but we can still explore when we learn about astral projection, when we do really deep meditations, when we do past life regressions, like we talked about in episode 2. That's all exploring moon themes. So this week, leaning into those moon things, embracing newness around those moon things, and being open to new beginnings starting here. We've got a lot of planets in Pisces this week and in coming weeks. Saturn, Neptune, the sun, the moon, when the moon comes in for its little 3-day stint in Pisces. Got a lot of Pisces energy going on. So if you want to explore some aspects of spirituality, if you want to play around with your depths, if you want to get into a really deep meditation, all of that is really well started. Just be aware that diving into those waters may stir up some grief, some mourning, some unhealed wounds, some unhealed pains that are reaching out, calling out to be addressed, calling out to you to address them, letting the waters flow. If you're feeling extra emotional this week, I don't blame you. There's a lot of emotions flying around, stirring up on this new moon. It's a good time for beginning a new cycle around your sense of self as a spirit, as a spiritual being in a body. Okay, that's our card of the week this week. And that's a little bit about the Pisces new moon. So this next interview that we have this week is actually a double take. So we had to record this interview a second time. I told you last week that I lost an interview with the guest and it was a bummer, but thankfully my gracious friend and guest agreed to do it again with me. So we just sat down and recorded this episode for you, and I hope you enjoy it. Hello and welcome. I'm here with Carly Croman. How are you doing today, Carly?
Doing well. Happy to be here.
This is our second time sitting down to record. Carly, I'm so grateful that you wanted to do this again. I loved that conversation that we had, and unfortunately, we lost about more than half. So I'm grateful that you're sitting back down here with me again, because I really love the work that you're doing in the Tucson community, and I want to get a chance to highlight and shout that out. So Carly is founder of Sonoran Sapphics. Can you tell us a little bit about what Sonoran Sapphics is and what inspired you to create this beautiful community here in Tucson?
Yeah, and sorry if there's construction noise. Hopefully, the microphone is blocking it out. My neighbors are getting some new landscaping, so we're excited for them. Sonoran Sapphics is a community group that started as an experiment in queer joy. And really, it is a place to connect with new friends, amazing, hot, brilliant humans, is sometimes what I like to say. But we run inclusive events about once a month. We also run a book club. And basically, our sort of mission inadvertently has become more queer joy. So, just creating space and the conditions for people to really lean into their joy and remind themselves that joy matters, and connecting and feeling supported in community is really the basis for which all the rest of our work comes from. It's the foundation that allows us to do the hard and sticky and maybe not as joyful all the time work that's necessary to create the world we want to live in. So, yeah, we started January 2024. So we just had our first birthday, and it's just been a whirlwind. It feels like it's taken on a life and momentum and identity of its own, and I get to be the steward.
Yeah, and that first birthday party was so much fun here at Pigeon Palace. There was like a middle of the day dance party, and I had such a good time. The DJ, Miss Godin, was pulling out some great hits, and it was such a nice opportunity to get together. I feel like every time I go to one of these events, like I get to meet someone new, make new friends, and yeah, really revel in that queer joy, which is more needed now than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you were there. Yeah. It's been such a cool project. And I think I talk about it a lot as a project. A lot of folks would like to see it formalized into an organization or a nonprofit or what have you, but it really feels like something I'm not doing alone, something that everyone who attends the events is shaping and growing alongside me, which is really fun. Yeah, we'll see like where it evolves, but right now it's been such a beautiful creative outlet for me. I get to flex into some of that experience design stuff that I love so much. And yeah, it's just this beautiful kind of outlet for everyone to be in the present moment and connecting to their curiosity and creativity. A lot of our events center around some sort of parallel play activity. This idea that when we're doing something with our hands, it can make connecting with new people feel a little less awkward or intimidating. And we've really seen that folks from across like neurodivergent, social anxiety, like different maybe barriers to entry are showing up at these events and having a good time and feeling included. And that feels like success to me.
I love that parallel play because, yeah, sometimes, especially if you're maybe showing up somewhere alone or you're not sure if you're going to know anyone, having something to do is really fun. So at the first anniversary party, there was some collaging going on. There was decorating these wonderful little party crowns. I'm so sad I lost mine afterwards. I think I either lost it on the streets of downtown Tucson or I left it at the Ethiopian restaurant that we went to afterwards. So someone found that somewhere.
Yeah.
We've mentioned book club. We've mentioned the first anniversary party. What other kind of events, past, present, future, has Sonoran Sapphics hosted?
Yeah. We did last February an urban plant walk where we got to know some of our local plant allies. My friends tease me. They're like, how does it feel to just create events that you want to go to? I'm like, it feels great. Like, it is exactly what I want to be doing. And so I studied herbalism in the past, and I really love plants. And so we did that. We did a huge kind of pride party that was inspired by tea dances of the past, which were gay, mostly men in New York couldn't publicly be gay in the city. They would go out into the country, and in the middle of the day, a daytime dance party seems to be a theme. But we were at the Royal Room, and lots of folks dressed up and had a true ball for Pride last June. But mostly our monthly events are centered around some sort of creative endeavor. So we also did a book swap. So something that like gets people together around a shared interest or allows them to explore something new. So
Mhm.
we're doing this month actually a partnership with a local artist where you will look at the person in front of you and not look down at your paper and draw their face as like a sort of speed friending. And then at the end of March, we're doing some hand sewing, like iron on patch
Ooh.
creation. So just like fun, maybe activities that you wouldn't necessarily do on your own, but because you're coming to the event, you can get a taste of something new and play. Really, I think it's all about that idea of play, that idea of sparking joy. And there's lots of different incredible, talented collaborators here in Tucson that we get to play with. Talking about past, present, future, something on the horizon this spring is we're going to partner with Tucson Queer Outdoors and host a camping trip on Mount Lemon. I'm really excited for that one. I think it
That
will
sounds
allow
really
all of us
fun.
to kind of reclaim, maybe some like wanting it to feel like a reclaim summer camp. So yeah.
Ooh, yes. Thinking about dance parties, so we've mentioned a couple daytime dance parties. It almost feels like bringing queer joy into the light rather than it
Mm,
being like a nighttime, middle of the night, we're hiding away in a club. It's like, no, we're out here in the middle of the day, dressed to the nines, like really authentically expressing in daylight. I feel like there's something to be said there about bringing that queer joy into the light, especially right now in a time when so many are trying to force queerness back into the shadows.
yeah, I really love that. Thanks for reflecting that back. Yeah. I think for me, I really wanted to move away from, or I didn't see myself in like party or club culture. It doesn't make me feel good. I think it's amazing and I think it's gorgeous and should be celebrated, but it wasn't like how I was forging relationships. And so wanting to create a space for people who are sober or who aren't necessarily, or a lot of our events, you still can have a drink because most of the third spaces and public spaces in Tucson are bars. But moving away from the idea that you have to partake in a substance in order to connect with people, yeah, has been like a
Yeah.
driving force.
I love that. Yeah, because there often maybe is more opportunity to have that nightlife. There's like that niche kind of is there. It's not super well fleshed out here in Tucson, but it's there a little bit. But like you said, things that throwing events, hosting parties that you want to go to, and like maybe that is starting a little earlier in the day, starting before the sun goes down and more on the sober end or the low ABV end, we could say. So I'm looking at these cards that I've turned over for the present of you, your work, namely Sonoran Sapphics, but of course there's so much more that you're doing beyond that. You're a movement instructor, you teach Pilates, you teach at the university here, and all of that feels kind of encapsulated by these two cards. Talking about bringing things back into the light, we've got two fiery cards here. We've got the King of Wands and we've got the Four of Wands. The Four of Wands, I think this is the third time the Four of Wands has come up in one of these interviews. So I'm going to have to sit with that. That's really incredible. Right off the bat, Carly, I'm curious, just looking at these images, what jumps out to you here? No wrong
I'm like
answers.
letting them load a little because it's a little bit fuzzy on my end, but I'm, is it true that on this side there's like a torch
Yes, so
happening?
there's a figure here carrying a torch and carrying like a big red banner or
Yeah.
flag and like kind of walking triumphantly forward. And then here we have like a wood stove with a pot of tea and a skillet kind of steaming on top and four oil lamps around the edges.
Yeah. That feels so aligned with what my experience has been in the world. My first job, I was the first employee of a startup.
Mm,
My first position at the U of A, no one had ever held that position before. The program I teach in right now, it didn't exist until we started it in
wow.
August 2022. And then Sonoran Sapphics, obviously, we have built it from scratch. And so I think this like torch bearer, but also like creation of something that feels warm and like home and is welcoming. Also, I drink so much tea. I'm a tea girly, so I love anytime tea shows
Some mint
up.
majesty, mint medley right here.
Multiple cups of herbal tea per day. Again,
Yeah.
the plants like winking at me from that card feels cute. But yeah.
Yes. You're hitting the nail on the head. I'm thinking of the word trailblazer, especially for this King of Wands. There's such like a trailblazing attitude about the King of Wands. Those firsts, that like carrying the torch forward, bringing the light, bringing the creation, the creative energy. Both of these cards being wands is really like hitting on how creative so much of your work is right now. The creation aspect of Sonoran Sapphics, where one, you're creating something that didn't necessarily exist here before. And two, so many of these events involve creativity, self expression, free expression, actual literal art making a lot of the times, or supporting giving like a platform to creatives in town. I'm thinking of like our beautiful like focaccia maker and having these opportunities for these creative people to kind of be front and center at some of these events. So definitely I can see you as the King of Wands carrying that torch. And when someone is leading that charge, I feel like it's implied in the King of Wands that there are people following this person. And following in the sense of, oh, I see that light that you're bearing. I see that beacon and I want to move towards that. And I want to continue kind of like following where that lighted path is going because it is sometimes easier or feels safer to have someone else in the lead. And then all of these folks who we've seen fill these events. I know we mentioned in the last recording that we did that these events have been at or over capacity pretty much every time. So those people kind of flooding in to be like, yes, like we want to be here and help kind of hold that light with you is really beautiful.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, it's been such a joy. And I think something that you said in terms of the idea that people want experiences, they want connection, they want these spaces, but maybe they don't know necessarily how to create it from nothing. And I think that aspect, that ambiguity, that maybe like scary unknown excites me. It's like where my kind of talents come together to bring things forward. And I wouldn't, though our culture sometimes privileges that skill set as something to be held up, I think, especially in the culture of entrepreneurship,
Mm-hmm.
if this would not exist if people didn't decide that this was worthy of their time. And so I think I'm
Mm-hmm.
not under the impression that I could have done this or I am doing it on my own at all. So that's everyone has their role. And I think about in our work as people who are building the future, as people who are resisting against every structure that keeps people in places without power, without access to power or resources. It's the same thing, right? There's a role for everyone. And I think the way that I found one of my roles was by prioritizing joy and by
Mm.
seeing joy as resistance and important. And especially for queer people as something that is a revolutionary act. Maybe that's a bold statement, but I think, yeah, I think I feel really lucky that people trust me to be the steward of this. And I am open to the idea that it might not always be me who is stewarding it, right? There might
Yeah.
come a time where the leadership structure of this project looks different. So trying to hold it with a lot of grace and non-attachment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You said that not everyone does feel comfortable being the one to say, hey, I'm going to do this thing and if you want to come it would be really awesome because that's really scary to put yourself out there in that way. Not everyone wants to do that. That's not everyone's role. But with that being something that is so exciting for you, that's that fire wands aspect of like I'm touching like the core of my body right here where it's like that solar plexus area, that sacral fire that is kind of what drives us and moves us forward and pushes us into action. So it seems like you have that in droves. Maybe that's some of that good Pilates core workout, fueling that fire. Then providing the structure around it. You mentioned the last interview cut off right as you were saying that you're a Capricorn and a Virgo. There's that like structural aspect that you bring to this where there is like, details that have to be attended to, and there is like the practical and the drudgery of organizing things. And not to say that it's not like fun, it can be fun for a lot of people, but there is like admin to do and just kind of like the boring little detail tasks. But providing that, I'm holding up the Four of Wands here because fours are so much about that structure and about like the foundation. And so you're kind of there setting that foundation for everyone to then come bring their creativity, bring their expression, bring their skills, bring whatever it is that they're bringing to the table. And then that almost becomes like that campfire. You've maybe put the ring of rocks there. You've set that space and said, okay, here's the space, and everyone's bringing their wood and their matches and their spark to then create what feels now like a beautiful roaring bonfire or well established hearth fire that is like Sonoran Sapphics, bringing people to it.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
So prior to starting this project, where have you been? What have you done? What came before this wonderful little egg that's growing in the world?
I think there's a lot of ways I could talk about this. And what's funny is I don't even remember how I talked about it last time we had this conversation, but I've had a pretty, I would say, winding path to the external eye, but what feels like a lot of the same through lines that have motivated the things that I've done. I'm from Tucson. I moved to Tucson right before high school. And so I feel so much connection to the Sonoran Desert because it brought me up. I had a lot of formative years here, and it's a really magical place. Like truly, I know everyone says that, but it's just such a magical place. I think something that we were talking about was like how the desert has such a maybe tolerance or is welcoming to weird and new ideas.
Mhm.
And I feel that has definitely been the case for me. I mentioned the startup I worked for. It was all about bringing innovation methodologies into schools, museums, and libraries. So basically closing the gap between Silicon Valley and our public education spaces. So fun, got me into education, got me into the idea that teaching can be so transformative. But I've always loved to learn. I've always loved community. I'm a millennial, so I wanted to change the world. Hello, that's
Yeah.
what we're all about. And
Yep.
I'm right on the cusp. My younger sisters are in Gen Z, so like feeling that pull in that direction as well. And I'm from Texas originally. I think that shapes my
Mm.
worldview. Grew up in a really conservative Catholic family. And so my coming out journey was pretty fraught. Being bisexual, I think, is such a blessing and such a superpower because I've had to like, how do I want to say this? Navigate binaries my whole
Mm.
life. Like this idea that I could only be one thing. And I think that way of being in the world crosses so many more aspects of myself than just my sexuality. Like this idea that I don't fit in any one designated role or box. And I always want to be combining and remixing and reimagining like what it means to be a creative human. So yeah, those are some of the things I'm into. I teach creative problem solving at the U of A, and I never imagined I'd be a professor, but I just kept saying yes and got the opportunity. And I think that's really how I move through the world is like what is lighting me up right now?
Mm.
What is bringing me joy? Like it's so
Mhm.
like I it's cheesy and it's can sound naive, but this idea of joy really drives me. I'm really interested in it. I explored in my creative writing joy and community and how do we bring those together to create solutions that really work for everybody. What else do I do? I've taught movement for the last 8 years and I'm really interested in embodied learning. But yeah, I just love people. I love people. And I want
Yeah.
people to feel that love. I think the reason I got into education in the first place is I, and this is maybe like reductive, but I really think that most of our problems could be solved if people like knew and felt true love very early in their
Mhm.
lives. And I think as educators, we're always playing catch up. Like, how do I make my classroom a space where you can get in touch with that love if you've already had it in your past or experience it for the first time?
I'm hearing in I'm hearing in what you're saying and seeing in the cards that I have in front of me here this like joy and love as nourishment. I feel like, and perhaps I'm making this up, but I feel like I'm hearing in what you're saying that bringing joy to people, bringing love to people through education, through experiences, through all these different avenues. Like we can bring joy and love through how you lead a movement class, like infusing that into everything you do, embodying that essence feels like a way that you can give nourishment to others. That is kind of like what you are offering as like your role in whatever it is you're doing. Does that sound fair to you to say?
Yeah. Yeah. I think nourishment, I'm so interested in like how we nourish each other and like relationship. I studied psychology and neuroscience. So it's like humans, how do they relate?
Yeah.
What are they doing? But I also think nourishing myself, like
Mm.
doing these things while it is like giving, it's I'm also like getting something back from it.
Yeah, yeah, and all of this is the essence of at least one of these cards that I've pulled here for the past. We have 2 court cards that have come up for kind of your past, which I love that you use the word embodied, a few times talking about your past because when court cards come up in any kind of reading, which as of right now, as I'm looking at this, of the 4 cards I've turned over, 3 of them are court cards now, and there's so much for us to learn about embodied action when it comes to the court cards because they kind of present these archetypes of different ways of being and different ways of moving through the world and invite us to discover how to embody that particular way of being or way of moving. And so the first one I want to talk about here is the Queen of Pentacles coming up. So here we see a figure sitting in front of a little stool that has a potted plant just barely sprouting out of it. There's plants growing in the background. There's a little watering can at their feet. There's a little rabbit in the corner and a pentacle or a coin. Oh, they have pentacles all over their socks too. This is the first time I'm noticing that. That's cute. But with the Queen of Pentacles, there's so much there about nourishment and specifically what you kind of ended on there about nourishing yourself, because the queens in a tarot deck are very good at ensuring that everyone is taken care of, themselves included, because they know how much capacity they have to give to others, and they know that their role oftentimes is in a role of nurturing and giving, but that role can't be fulfilled unless they themselves are comfortable and are nurtured and have like received all that they need. So I hear you like recognizing that part of your role of like, yes, these are things that I do because they fill my cup and allow me to then provide so much to those around me. And then I also hear a lot of idealism in what you're talking about, in that, like, you said maybe it's a bit of a bold statement to say that so many of these problems that we see in the world can be solved by people being loved from an early age, like just infusing our lives with love. And so the Page of Cups coming up here, the Page of Cups, I feel like is reminding us that it's really good to hold on to that idealism and to hold on to that sense of like, yeah, what if we all had all the love that we needed? can we imagine what that might look like? And even if it seems so outside of the realm of possibilities, can we still hold that in our mind of what if? Because the pages are very idealistic is a good word. They're youthful. They're kind of have this childlike quality where maybe they're not thinking of all the all the kind of responsibilities and limitations, all those things that Saturn brings, like the ways in which the world is going to say no to us. The pages, they just kind of ignore that. And Cups is so much about love and healing. So there's this maybe like idealistic sense of and sharing and giving that love so freely in the way that children often do. How can that be like more embodied in how can we embody that essence even as adults, how we move through our lives now? So I see so much in your past work of nourishment, nourishing, giving to others, making sure that you are receiving enough yourself, and then that foundation growing into the cards we have in the present, which is this beautiful fire of creativity and self-expression that's now like kind of creating a beacon for others to then come and maybe join you in some of that idealism.
As you were speaking, it reminded me of this commencement speech that I saw really early in my career by the dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, James Ryan. And I think he ended up writing a book based on the commencement speech, but it's like these five, like life's five essential questions, basically. And two of my favorites of the five are, I think, my like core question, and it reminds me of this like idea of nourishment is how can I help? One of my favorite questions in any kind of context. And then the other one that I think speaks to my really propensity and excitement and passion for solving complex problems is this idea of couldn't we at least?
Mm.
And starting with what can we do? Couldn't we at least try XYZ? And I think those two questions are really what Sonoran Sapphics was born out of. How can I help? And couldn't we at least get together and collage?
Yeah, couldn't we at least have a book club?
Yeah.
Couldn't we at least have one camping trip for queer people, maybe?
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
love that. So you're in a phase right now where you're kind of looking forward. You've had a year of Sonoran Sapphics is now under your belt. You've had a little bit of time to reflect on that past year and everything that it brought and created. Now, what are you seeing on the horizon? What do you see when you look forward to the future of Sonoran Sapphics and the future of your work, maybe even outside of Sonoran Sapphics, if that's on your mind now? What's what's coming up on not necessarily even what's coming up on the horizon. I've been kind of framing this portion of these conversations as like giving us an opportunity to imagine the best case scenario moving
I love
forward because there's so much right now. We open our phones and we're immediately inundated with like the 15 worst things that have happened in the last 3 hours and there's so much like
that.
fear around the future. So what are you looking forward to in the
Mm,
future?
yeah. What's coming up today? And I think if you caught me later this week or at a different time of day, like maybe I would answer this differently. Maybe you've sensed this in our conversation, but I am very feelings driven. What's the vibe? And the vibe today is really thinking about intentional, specific growth. I think our culture, at least my experience of our culture, is very growth for growth's sake, right? Get bigger, do more, scale, make more money. I really want to resist that with Sonoran Sapphics. I think growing really intentionally and slowly and with the input of the community, we are just about at the point where I might be thinking about bringing on some other team members and thinking about the structure of that and what that feels like for them is really exciting. So maybe if I were to vision, it's like there's a thriving collaborative team that runs Sonoran Sapphics. We're able to serve people both near and far. I think it would be really exciting if folks that can't connect in on a in-person level, if there's other people in especially the southern Arizona, like the Sonoran Desert is vast and it's not only in Tucson. So thinking about what that looks like to cross boundaries in my own work and in my own life. I know I mentioned this in the last conversation because it's on my mind all the time. I'm thinking about rest and thinking about
Mm,
pockets of time that are not scheduled or occupied because as a creative person, as a human, I need like that inhale, right? So as someone who is like holding a lot of space in a lot of contexts, if I don't find inspiration that's not in service of anything else, that's just in service of myself, then I very quickly can get really frazzled and burnt out, and it's not good for anyone that I'm in relationship with. So I think future me is really well rested and resourced and inspired so that I can give to others. And I think I'm thinking about the future of the queer community too. I think there's a lot of
yeah.
ways that we can do better for each other and show up in ways that are like really intersectional and varied, and we all find our role within them. Because there are ways, in my experience, that the queer community perpetuates some of the things that are really harmful. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I that's some of the things I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Well, I think the future is very bright for you, for Sonoran Sapphics. There's There's so much momentum. There's so much
Mhm.
momentum, and I started forming that sentence even before I remembered what card I had just flipped over for this, because there's a card that is so much about momentum, and that's the 8 of Wands. So the 8 of Wands here in this image is we see 8 fireworks, like, kind of poised, ready to go off, and there's a long fuse that's connected to them, and the fuse is already lit. The fuse is already lit. The momentum is there. The ball is rolling. People are so excited. I know, I attended a planning meeting late last year. Gosh, or was that in January or December?
Yeah, I think December. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So late last year, there was kind of a planning meeting for looking forward to the future. And you could just tell that people cared. They really care about this process. And they think there's much, much more to be done and much, much more joy to be cultivated and reasons to get together and have joy and expression. And so I love seeing that. It's beautiful because it's also the double of the 4. So in the center here with the present cards, we had that 4 of Wands, and then we double that, double and send it to the next with the 8 of Wands.
Yeah.
And even more exciting than the 8 of Wands coming up for the future here for you, we have the World. So the
Hmm.
final card in the major arcana, for those who are not as familiar with how a tarot deck is laid out, there are two unequal halves to a tarot deck. There's the major arcana and the minor arcana. And the major arcana are those cards that have those big name titles like the World, the High Priestess, the Magician, the Fool. They've got big titles. And they are laid out in a sequence. They're numbered from 0 to 21. And they kind of tell the story. One way to think about it is the fool's journey to enlightenment. So the fool is numbered 0, and the fool kind of moves through all those 21 cards to then reach quote unquote enlightenment at the end. And I always say that enlightenment it's not a destination, it's just a a point in the journey. None of us are going to become the Buddha in this lifetime, I like to say, but the world does represent that culmination point, that peak. So we have this figure here who is meant specifically to be a androgynous person or someone fully outside of the binary, both the fool and the world. Like I talked about in episode 1, the fool and the world can be thought of as one of the same. The fool evolves into the world, and they're both meant to be kind of outside of that gender binary, representing all things, the union of all things and the dissolution of binaries. And so it's the world dancer kind of finally reaching that peak point, that culmination. So there's more dancing, more joy, like the full embodiment of queer joy, I think can be seen in this card showing up in the future position for you and for Sonoran Sapphics. And I think that's so beautiful. I'm so excited for what's to come. What events do you have upcoming?
Yeah, we are on March 1st, we are hosting an event at the Annex in partnership with the local artist I mentioned, Lana Sheaf. And it's called Face a Friend. So it's speed friending
Mm-hmm.
through some drawing. No, our previous artistic background is needed. It's very much just come as you are. And then at the end of March, I mentioned we're doing a collaboration with a local expert in sewing, Kashfi, and we're going to do learn some sewing skills while making really cute iron-on patches. And then we have that camping trip coming up April. We have some other collaborations in the works, and we'll always have book club. I actually I can tell you our read for the month of March. We've
Ooh,
already
book
selected it. We are reading Dramatic Pause. Maybe I should have had this ready to go. Oh, Hijab Butch Blues. It's a memoir. It has by Lamia H. It has been like lauded for its humor and also just exploration of identity. If you want to join us, we're meeting on March 20th.
amazing book club. And I think we touched on this in the last interview, and one thing that I want to just really specifically name while we're here today is that Sonoran Sapphics is really open to all queer folks. All I would say probably open to all folks in general. I can't imagine you really turning anyone away, but Sonoran Sapphics is specifically queer centered and is a trans inclusive group. I know you have thoughts on this.
Maria Elena, you are so psychic because as I was sitting here, I was like, I really want to make sure that as I'm like speaking publicly about the group, that I remind everyone, like you just said, that it is a trans inclusive space. In fact, I try to go beyond that and say we champion our trans community members and we want trans and non binary and gender non conforming folks to feel like this is their space and that your experience is so central and essential to everything that we're doing. So, yes, absolutely. The word sapphic, I think, has been reclaimed by Gen Z to be more of an umbrella term. I chose it specifically for the alliteration because I'm a poet, but
Yeah,
also
it sounds really good.
but also because I didn't want to make this a lesbian centered club because I'm bisexual. Like, I wanted it to be a space where we could really connect across identity. And I'm hopeful that if our events resonate with you and you identify anywhere across the queer spectrum, you feel welcome to come join in and find your joy and give us feedback if there are ways that events are not inclusive or need to shift. I'm always open to that feedback and open to making the changes we need to.
Yeah, amazing. It's such a it feels like such a project that is in flux and can kind of shift and mold and adjust based on the people and what the people want, because like we've said, it's events that you want to attend, but you can so easily, you, Carly Croman, can be so easily, hopefully, kind of separated from the organization that's our pseudo organization, the club,
Yeah,
I guess, that is kind of taking
yeah.
on its own life based on the members who make it what it is.
Yeah, I very much don't want to center myself. I want to center the community that's emerging. And so we'll keep doing that. And hopefully, if you're listening, you'll be a part of it very soon, if not already.
Yeah. Well, thank you for letting me center you today, Carly, because I do think you definitely deserve your flowers for getting this ball rolling and providing this space for folks in Tucson to come out and have more queer joy, because we will have queer joy. They can pry it from our cold, dead fingers if they have to, but God willing, we don't get there.
Yeah, I think that joy is the antidote, right? Like expression
Yeah.
and community, like they are balms in a time that can be really challenging. So I'm so appreciative that you shared this gorgeous space with me. I'm glad that we persisted and did it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I am so happy to learn with you and from you.
Thank you. Where, Carly, can people find you, your work, and more about Sonoran Sapphics?
Totally. We do have a website in the works. It's not live yet, but this is the official tease. I have not told that to anyone. But
So tea.
until then, we are the best place to find us is on Instagram at Sonoran Sapphics. Sapphics has two P's. And then I am also online under my name. I think my Instagram handle is carly.here. That's where I am most frequently. But we also have a Discord. So if you find us on Instagram, you don't have an Instagram, or you are trying to pivot away from owned platforms, because the conversations are really lovely and it's just such a sweet space. And we have a channel that I'm really proud of and excited about called Go Together, where you can place things that you're going to or share events, and folks will go with you and you'll get to have some company as you go about your events. So,
Oh, that's incredible. I've got to get on the Discord.
yeah.
So when that website is live, I will like retroactively link it in the show
Cool.
notes. So the
Great.
Sonoran Sapphics website can be retroactively linked. Check the show notes. If it's there, it's there. If it's not, head over to Instagram.
Yeah.
Amazing. And let's all hop in that Discord and have a good time. Spread some queer joy.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carly. I will talk to you so soon. And thank you to everyone who listened to our conversation today. And I'd like to remind you once again, happy shuffling.